The scene starts with a man stranded, in the middle of the sea, on a raft. He finally arrives on an island. As he searches the area, he finds a chapel amongst other things. He meets a nun who he asks if she could speak English. She nods and replies yes. He asks about the presence of any Japanese soldiers on the island. She is relieved and happy to meet an American. She tries asking about the presence of other Americans on the island, to which he replies no, just him. She confirms that no Japanese soldiers were on the island, as well as she being the only one on the island. Her name is Sister Angela. He introduces himself as Allison, a U.S. Marine. Turns out, she was part of a missionary expedition. The Japanese were raiding islands and conscripting the Navy, while taking the Europeans as prisoners. A ship had arrived for them, with instructions to close the mission and go to Fiji. But the reverend she accompanied, Father Phillips, refused to leave, without the father of this island, Father John Ryan. Father Phillips returned to this island. She accompanied him because he was ill-suited to travel alone, as he was over 70 years old. On arrival to this island, they realized the Japanese had already raided it, and found no one on the island. Father Philip died the next morning, after he fell and suffered a stroke, making her the only person left on the island. Mr. Allison's story was that he had been ambushed alongside fellow crew members by the Japanese soldiers. They had continuously released bombs into the water around them. Luckily, he saw an empty raft, in which he escaped, and just happened to arrive on this island. They try to gather food and supplies. While gathering food, he happens to find a cave. They later eat a meal of turtle meat, which Angela says is a gourmet dish. Allison talks of the possibility of using a rubber raft to travel for 300 miles, even with the Japanese on the water. To which he concludes, would be a crazy idea and only possible if it was just him. She asks him what he would do if she also would like to do the same. To which he replies that he also would think her a crazy herself. Allison was raised in an orphanage. He assumed that due to how he was found in a street called Allison Street, in an egg crate, he was illegitimate. At the orphanage he was taught about God, but at 14, he broke out of the orphanage. He later joined the U.S. Marines years later. They agree that they both have similarities. She jokes about her instructor, whom they nicknamed Holy Terror. He tells her he is surprised to see a nun making a joke or that they would look pretty. She talked of a lovely Sister Mary, who was previously a model. Her face was in all the fashion magazines, but she decided to become a nun because it gave her greater happiness than anything else. A Japanese aircraft suddenly flies over the island. He quickly pushes her under a coconut branch for cover. He suggests they could stay in a cave for safety, as the Japanese craft was still scouting the area. The next morning, the Japanese deploy bombs on the island. This destroys the church, the trees, and his raft. A Japanese ship docks on the island that same day. The soldiers fire bullets while still scouting the island. Angela suggests turning herself over to the Japanese, to which he refuses. Allison disagrees as he doesn't know what might happen to her. He tells her to leave the feeding to the U.S. Marines, meaning himself. Allison goes fishing. Unfortunately, the Japanese again use a boat to scout the area. He quickly hides on the rocks on the sea. The current is high enough that he is able to escape being caught. The Japanese soldiers have finally occupied the island. They make it a port. Allison, despite the island being filled with Japanese soldiers, goes down to their camp. He applies dirt on his skin. He is able to bypass the watch guard. He finds the storage room, which holds a lot of food supplies, and takes some. But as he tries to leave, he is unable to, as a Japanese soldier enters the room. He quickly hides and remains unnoticed by the soldiers. Angela wakes up to find him missing from the cave. The Japanese soldiers finally leave the room. Allison then tries to leave the room, but finds out his entrance in is locked. He is only able to use the other door to escape during the soldiers' morning drill. Angela hears gunshots and assumes he has been killed. In the meantime, Allison returns to the cave. She is very relieved to see him alive. He recalls telling her not to leave the cave. He then shows her the food supplies he is able to get. She tells him to promise her to never go out without telling her, as she wouldn't know what to do. He agrees. He leaves a flower and a comb for her. She tells him the comb is indeed beautiful, but, as a nun's hair is customarily kept short, she doesn't use a comb. But she can keep it as a keepsake, to cherish it. He asks suppose a nun changed her mind to no longer be a nun. She tells him that their vows are not taken lightly. That though possible, it's quite rare and requires permission from the Pope. The Pope grants a special dispensation, but at the cost of losing their immortal souls. However, such a thing is inconceivable, as they are given a long time to make up their minds and hearts. Also, their final vows are only taken after 5 years. Like in her case, she is to take her final vows next month. The Japanese soldiers leave the island. Allison and Angela are excited about the freedom they now have. They use this opportunity to do some personal cleanups. He tries to express his interest in her, and tells her if she would like he could pick some flowers for her. To which she politely replies thank you. She asks him what he thinks might happen next. He replies that maybe America has won. That's why the Japanese pulled out, so American soldiers might soon come to the island. He then tells her not to take her final vows on becoming a nun. He tells her he hasn't really lived or loved anyone. He would like to take care of her. Simply put, to marry her. He asks for a chance, to which she replies there was none, as she has already given her heart. She has a silver ring that signifies her engagement to Jesus, and after her final vows will be changed to a gold one. Allison continues to look out for any American sea troops. He backtracks on his proposal, saying that there are lots of temptations that comes with the job of being a Marine officer. So, it's better not to be tied down by marriage. Therefore, she was doing him a favor. She should forget about what he told her. To which she replies, certainly. He gets drunk after drinking a bottle of Japanese wine. This loosens his tongue. Then, he asks her what she wants to be a nun for. Why wasn't she old and ugly? Angela tries to distract him with a game of draft, but he tells her he has no interest in playing. In a nutshell, he tries to convince her drunkenly into seeing why her still being a nun was useless. Allison tells her they are both alone on the island like Adam and Eve, with this island is the Garden of Eden. As expected, his drunken words and behavior upsets her. She leaves the house and spends the night in the woods under the pouring rain. The next morning, he is now sober and finds her very sick. He apologizes to her that he didn't mean any word he said last night. It was just the wine talking. He quickly picks her up, but the Japanese soldiers return to the island at that same time. He takes her back to the cave. She is very sick and in need of warm clothes. Allison goes to the Japanese camp to get some for her. Unfortunately, he is seen by a Japanese soldier, who he ends up killing. He hides the body by throwing it into the sea. She finally recovers after 2 days. She thanks him for changing her wet clothes. But he tells her he deserves no thanks, as it was his fault she got sick. He was drunk and she got scared of him and ran away. She tells him she didn't run away but from the truth. She knew he wouldn't have done her any harm. He tells her his words were wrong, despite him saying they would be alone for years and years on the island. Lots of Japanese just happened to show up. So, his predictions were wrong. Angela tells him that the Japanese might not be on the island tomorrow and that tomorrow might not come. Perhaps God has no intention for her to take her final vows and only Him knows what will happen. The Japanese begin setting the island's grasses and trees on fire. They have found the body of the Japanese soldier. They start searching the island. He suggests exposing himself, but she refuses. Allison positions himself at the entrance of the cave, while Angela prays for his soul to be accepted into heaven. In a short time, the Japanese find their cave, with instructions for them to come out with their hands up. When they make no move to do so, the soldier then tells them he would send grenade into the cave. Suddenly, the island is raided with bombs by air fleets. The soldier is killed. Allison quickly climbs out of the cave and identifies the air fleets as that of American soldiers. He is very excited. As they wait for the American soldiers to stop the raid, she asks if there will be deaths. He tells her of some weapons on the island that the Japanese have set to attack intruders. He suddenly becomes startled. She asks him what could be the matter. He replies that God was telling him in his heart it would be an easy landing, so there will be no deaths. He tells her of the plan God has put in his head. She asks him if he was sure it's God he was obeying, not just his natural desire to take part in the fight. He tells her he is sure, to which she says if it was so, God would protect him. He then starts dismantling the Japanese bombs on the island. He ends up getting injured on his shoulder. He returns and tells her his mission has been accomplished. She quickly tells him to lay down and tries to stop the bleeding from his wound. As she tends to his injury, he tells her they were coming to the end of their stay together. While they might see each other on and off in the next couple of days, it won't be just the two of them. He tells her he was very pleased to have met her. It was a privilege to know her and that he wishes her every happiness. He bids her goodbye. She also bids him goodbye. She tells him that no matter how many miles apart they are, or whether she ever gets to see his face again, he would always be her dear companion. Always and always. The American soldiers finally arrive on the island. As they inspect the Japanese machines, they are quite surprised no shots have been fired by it. The movie ends with Allison being taken off the island on a stretcher and Angela leaving the island as well. If you enjoyed this video, click on the like and subscribe button to get notified for future content.